Can we just hold on a second, right? What kind of state is this bar in that I walk into it looking like this, and this man greets me as such?
Wow, you look like you need a drink.
Yes,
Covered
I apologize for my
in blood, and he's like, let me buy you a drink.
It's been a long
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon when you are watching this. I am Professor Eskra, also known as FP Eskra, here with another Big Brain Relax and Learn. And this week, we will continue our conversation about serial killers. However, last week, while we talked about myths and misconceptions and monsters and all of the things that make society obsessed with serial killers, what we will be talking about today, the biogenics and psychology of serial killers, diving deep into the mind of serial killers, and we will hopefully get to the topic, well, we will get to the topic of psychopaths. And by the end of this, you shall know everything you need to know about the psychology of psychopaths and serial killers. So join us, won't you, while we talk about serial killers while playing Vampyr, because again, this game is just so apt, so it's perfect. Just chef's kiss. Mwah. So, and we just met Dr. What's-His-Face, who shined us with the cross, and we were like, ooh. And if you'll remember, I asked you last week, is it just the cross, or is it like other holy symbols as well that, turn away the vampires? Nobody ever gave me an answer. So remember, go on the YouTubes, leave a comment, like, subscribe, hit that bell, all that. Anyways, so we now need to interrogate the locals. But while we do that, we are going to begin talking about it. And so really what this topic really comes down to, we're going to walk because only a crazy person runs around a bar at night. There's like 4 people here. 3 people. 1, 2, 3. I can't count. Anyways, this topic, what it really boils down to, is essentially, it's criminology. And criminology is essentially the study of, why crime, right?
I'll do you one better. Why is
Crime. What criminology tries to understand is, the really looking at multiple aspects. Much like how psychology, or at least the field of psychology, we don't need to talk to this guy. The field of psychology treats all behaviors as kind of like with 3 factors: the biological factors, the psychological factors, and the cultural factors, right? Or the socio-cultural factors, right? Criminology looks the same way, but specifically at what causes people to commit crime. Well, what we're going to do tonight is kind of apply that, but hard focus it, right, on serial killers. And criminology is a fun field to really look into because it started out, right now it's kind of sort of like a scientific art to a certain extent. There is some science behind it, especially when it comes to psychology, and these are the soft sciences, mind you. And there's still an art to it, right? It requires interpretation. We'll get into that later tonight. But really it started out as like more of a pseudo-science, right? Stuff that really had no scientific backing whatsoever. And so, kind of to, I guess, start off, we can start with the example of phrenology, right? And if any of you have ever seen one of those kind of brain maps, right? It's like this old cartoon brain map where it's the kind of profile of a person's head with the brain, and all the little cutouts have it, and it's like, oh, this area is like happiness, and this is art, and that was a phrenology map. Is what that was. The idea is that your brain, in different distinct compartments, hold different. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
Hold different distinct areas of interest or personality traits or anything like that. And based upon, you would be able to tell what somebody's traits were or what their interests were, or, what have you, by measuring their skull. And that's where, I don't know how old most of you are, but if you remember the old Looney Tunes, sometimes the doctor would take these huge calipers and put them on a head.
She's the sloping brow and cranial bumpy to the career criminal.
Sir, phrenology was dismissed as quackery 160 years ago.
course you'd say that. You're the brain pan of a stagecoach tilter.
And the idea was is that there were lumps on your skull, right, that indicated that that part of the brain was overactive. And then you could look at the phrenology map and see, oh, well, this person likes to kill, lock them up, kind of thing. Phrenology had a whole bunch of problems with it. A lot of them really had to do with they were kind of racist in nature, because they were used to prove, quote unquote, the white man's superiority to, the black man or other foreigners, what have you. If you want a really good example of, some of the arguments that phrenology made to justify like slavery, watch Django Unchained. There's a great scene where Leonardo DiCaprio basically goes into the whole spiel about
the science of phrenology is crucial to understanding the separation of our two species.
It's actually a really, really good example of how it was used. Pseudoscience does not apply, right? But once upon a time, that was kind of like the cutting edge. Kind of on top of that, right? Then you also have Cesar Lombroso, who is the father of criminology. He believed that you would be able to tell whether or not somebody was going to be a criminal or an artist or a successful businessman or what have you, based upon, so this lady just gave us a clue that the bartender knows the man we're looking for. Cesar Lombroso believed that you could tell what a person was going to be based upon what he called atavistic traits. And basically, what his theory broke down to is that you could look at somebody and tell, what their profession was going to be, whether they're going to be a criminal or whether they were going to be a stand-up citizen. And essentially what he did was he went into prisons and he took pictures of all of the prisoners and then started kind of saying, well, it looks like that most of these guys have big noses or strong jawlines and saying those are atavistic traits that correlate with criminality, and thus if we can identify them and if somebody has a certain number of atavistic traits, they are more likely to become a criminal than somebody else. That's where criminology started, right? That was like the birth of criminology. That is by no means where we are today. We have moved past the pseudoscience of phrenology and atavistic traits or atavistic anomalies, as Cesar Lombroso sometimes called them. Instead, today, when we study the brain, we understand that it's not distinct little areas of the brain that contain traits. No, it is the brain does play a role in how we act and what we do. Instead, what we do today is we look at the brain and we look at, well, there are neurotransmitters that the brain uses to communicate with itself. Do they play a role? What about testosterone and estrogen and all the other pheromones and stuff that encourage action in people? That's where the science has become very grounded in reality nowadays. There's actually a really high correlation between serial killers and prior head trauma. I'm not talking like 90-some%, but there's a not insignificant majority of them that usually present with head trauma somewhere in their past. I'm going to examine this. So now we are investigating. We are criminologists ourselves now. Additionally, PTSD, right? PTSD can cause all sorts of behavioral issues, can cause stress, can cause episodes of mania, essentially. Whole slew of problems that can come along PTSD, and we're starting to understand it a hell of a lot more than we once did. In addition to maybe just the physical aspects of the brain, there's also biochemical factors, right? And what I mean by biochemical is chemicals that affect our biology, that can affect our personality, that can affect a whole slew of ways that we behave. This can play a role in the study of epigenetics. And epigenetics is the idea that our DNA can be altered by the outside world, by chemicals that we take in, starting with, what our mothers take in when we are in the womb, right? You can actually, I think I have to start walking because, the killer spots his prey and he slowly walks up to him as he... However, he's a bad guy, so we're not doing anything untoward. I'm going to stun him, and then I'm going to eat him! So we have to start out with kind of like a bang. Oh, get out of here, you bastard. Oh. Ooh, that was real quick. I believe there's another guy up there. We're going to keep walking. I don't think he sees us. I think if we wait, he'll turn around. So while we wait for him, it's all right. I'll just... There it was. That was quick. Anywho, epigenetics, the study of chemicals and how they affect our DNA. They can affect us in the womb. They can affect us in as we grow old, and our DNA controls everything about us. So of course, messing with our DNA can affect, you know, how we behave in real life. The other things is actually what you eat. What you eat can affect how you behave or what you do or your personality traits as well. Because there's been a lot of work into the study of what they call gut bacteria. Oh, yes. Proven gunner and a proven brawler. There we go. Can't stop it. Ooh. Alright. Hold on one second, because all of this combat is happening. Ooh, stop it. Stop it! Because if we die in a lecture, that would be embarrassing. No, feed. Should feed. There we go. Now we're good. Alright. Bad guys are gone. We can continue talking. Gut bacteria. What you eat actually affects, you know, how your gut biome works. And there's been a lot of studies into, you know, how that affects behavior. And so, we are going to go up there. What you eat, along with, you know, chemicals in around, can also affect how we behave in society. Oh, I'm going to murder this guy. We are going to sneak up on him. We're going to stun him. And then we are going to feed. And then I believe if I do this... Yeah. So we are killing like bad people. There's this guy. There's those two guys down there. Alright, moving on. Vitamin deficiencies, low blood sugar plays a role. It's actually, once you really start looking into all of the ways that our bodies, our physical bodies, the things that we put in them, the things that we are around just in nature, or not in nature, but in society, how it affects our behavior is, it really creates a, I should be able to, there we go, do that, and again do this, there we go. Ow, give me your blood. Stop shooting me, you're a bastard. There we go. He's done. Hup. We'll eat and kill. Alright. Bad guys are dead. So, the biochemical factors. Really what this plays down to is the fact that our bodies like to be in balance, right? Our bodies like an equilibrium of all things. The amount of food in our bodies, the amount of water in our bodies, the amount of radiation that we are around, right? Our body likes equilibrium. It likes balance. And when anything throws that balance off, it can cause problems. And part of the reason why we look into this, again, beyond just the criminological aspects of it, it's really to understand human behavior, which is really kind of one of the reasons why we try to understand serial killers in the first place, is because we want to know, you know, how do we avoid becoming a serial killer? Do we have to do anything fancy or new, or is it just basically eat right and exercise and all that? There are some defunct theories that should probably be mentioned. Good. We're here to rest place, which is good now that we're out of combat. I will refill my ammo. Leave. And steal those shillings. Some defunct theories One of the, what was called the super male. That was somebody with an extra Y chromosome, XYY. Then there was a theory once upon a time that serial killers were these super males. It was the additional testosterone that the other Y chromosome gave them that caused them to be violent and sociopathic and all that. And it wasn't. Another one is like, radiation and excess of radiation or artificial light or something like that, right? Now, there are studies still going on about those and how they affect behavior, but they are not correlated with serial killing. And that's the big thing, right? You have to keep in mind that everything we're looking at right now, you have to be careful what we're linking as a correlation and what we're linking as causation. Correlations, right, just mean that the two are related, that they concur, that they occur together. Causation, however, is where one causes the other. Correlation never, ever, ever can be interpreted as causation. Because when two things correlate, just because they correlate doesn't mean that they cause each other whatsoever. And you could actually look up on the internet some funny correlations. Did you know the amount of cheese consumed in the U.S. directly correlates with the amount of people who die by being strangled in their own bed sheets? Look it up. I'm telling you, the graphs are right on. Doesn't mean that cheese is causing people to wrap themselves up in their bed sheets and die. And it doesn't mean that the fear of those bed sheets is causing people to consume more cheese. It's simply that there's a correlation. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight is really more correlation than causation. But in some instances, when two things correlate, one can have a causational effect on the other, such as a windmill, right? The faster the wind is blowing, the faster a windmill's blades spin. Those two correlate, but it also, the wind is causing the windmill to spin. That's causation, right? Correlation can mean, but you should never just take a straight correlation and interpret it as causation. Some more of these correlational kind of biogenic factors, while I decide what to upgrade here. I have testosterone surplus. There is a correlation between a testosterone surplus and violent behavior or impulsive behavior, as well as serotonin surplus. Actually, serotonin is one of those neurotransmitters in the brain that kind of has an effect on like a lot of personality traits. Too much of it is bad, too little of it is bad. However, serotonin in the right amounts can do a lot of things. It's like the happiness chemical. It causes you to feel hungry, it causes you to feel happy. It does like a whole slew of things. Okay, here's we're just going to run from these guys. We don't need to fight them again. Really, what we're kind of looking at, too, is especially with those imbalances. Oh, boy.
The whole building reeks of it.
I think we found
So strong it makes me dizzy.
our bad guy. Really, these imbalances cause what we perceive to be, a scythe. The difference between an introvert and an extrovert. And surprise, surprise, most serial killers fall in the extrovert category. Think about, is it causation that all this cheese talk makes me want cheese? That's correlation, but probably causation as well. This is actually a really good time to kind of stop, because what we are going to meet is somebody who has gone a little nuts. And our next topic is going to be insanity. So let me murder this guy, and then we will talk about insanity. Hello, I've interrupted this video to ask you to subscribe, like, comment, follow over at twitch.tv/fbescra, and make sure that you have notifications turned on so that you never miss an episode or a lecture from the Big Brain Relax and Learn. Now back to the video. Oh boy.
I must put it down.
Whoop. I stabbed him. I can eat him. Oh, I missed him. Oh, ow, he hit me. I can eat him again. This fight's going better than the last one did. Oh, come on, come on. Do one more. There it is. Now eat. And then, boom, boom. Did it. I killed him. That guy was clearly a little insane, which is a fun word. And we're going to help this guy, and then we're going to talk about it. That guy some would label as insane, right? He was going crazy. He was eating people's faces, much like the people with the bath salts. Remember that a couple years ago? Insanity, however, is not a diagnostic term. Insanity is actually a legal term. And insanity, most serial killers, the vast majority of them, cannot be labeled as insane by that legal standard, okay? However, to explain why, I kind of have to explain what insanity is. And insanity generally follows 3 different rules, okay? But the most famous is what is known as the McNaughton rule, right? There's also the Durham rule and the Bronner rule, but the McNaughton rule is the most commonly used. And so what the McNaughton rule states is that a person can be labeled as insane if, due to a defect of the mind or a disease of the mind, the person cannot know the nature or quality of their action, or did not know what they were doing was wrong. That's what the McNaughton rule says about insanity. If you can prove that the person did not know what they were doing was wrong, or that they didn't know the quality of their action, and it's due to something, off in their brain, they can be labeled as insane. Now, what does that do? Doesn't mean that they're innocent. The jury can find them guilty by reason of or innocent by reason of insanity. And really what that means is that you're not going home, you're going to a mental institution. Insanity is a legal term. Again, most serial killers are not insane. And why is that? I mean, it's actually fairly simple. Look at the definition. The second part of that rule, they didn't know what they were doing was wrong, or they didn't understand the quality of their actions, which is kind of the first part. If a serial killer didn't understand the quality of their action, we're going to learn that really a lot of serial killers absolutely understand the quality of their action. They know what they're doing, and they are actively choosing to do it because it gives them some sort of satisfaction in one way or another. If you remember some of the typologies that we mentioned last week. Do they know what they're doing is wrong? Absolutely they do. Otherwise they wouldn't hide it. By simple fact that you are hiding a crime, you know what you're doing is wrong, and thus can't be labeled as insane. Right? If they just went, yeah, I killed that guy, why? What's wrong? Well, that's probably insane. That's a very, very simple explanation of it. There's usually a little bit more to it than that. But that's actually a really good spot to pause for right now before we get into actual mental illness, because I do need to go check on my beans. Mental illness is, again, this is kind of one of those things where it's most people think there has to be something wrong with them, right? They have to be mentally unfit. They have to be psychotic or psychopaths, or when it comes to mental illness, right? Right. One of the more common ones is, they are psychotic, right? And psychosis can come in a variety of forms, right? Far too many for me to even try to list off right now. Basically, psychosis is that an individual has lost touch with reality in some way, right? It can develop in hallucinations, and whether auditory or visual or what have you. It can be, the good doctor is going to change into the coolest coat I have ever seen. Hallucinations, disorganized speech, grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior, delusions. That's the stuff that psychosis presents as. Psychosis, however, it can present as a danger to others, but the vast majority of people who suffer from psychosis of some kind, look at that coat. Oh, it's such a nice coat. The vast majority of people who suffer from psychosis are more a danger to themselves than to other people, okay? So this idea that serial killers are all psychotics, no. There may be a handful, but by no means are they in the majority. So that is defunct. Another mental illness that seems to be strongly attached to serial killers, multiple personality disorder, which is kind of the layman's term for it. But for diagnostic purposes, is more accurately described as dissociative identity disorder, DID. And DID is a really, really interesting disorder because depending upon who you talk to, some people say that it doesn't exist, and some people say that it absolutely does. Now, before I get into it, however, we are going to experience an episode, right? And this is an episode that we can actually return to at a later date. If you remember, he's spotted two individuals, and all of a sudden there's a fight. Oh, and he senses blood. Oh, and the bloodlust takes hold, and I can feel the blood. And so, the good doctor now has to approach and either give in to his urge or fight it. Now, we just witnessed this man stab another guy. However, what we are going to do, and this is to kind of illustrate a psychopath, all right, which we're going to talk about in a bit. We are going to, be more polite. When it comes to dissociative identity disorder, it can present as, two distinct personalities that exist within the same person. It usually comes about as a result of trauma, right? And now the game actually has this really cool concept in which you can either kill people as soon as you meet them and eat them, and it gives you a certain amount of XP, or you can like get to know them and like really cultivate them and groom them, if you will, and then eat them later for more XP. And that's what we're going to do with this guy. Even though he's a piece of shit, we're going to mesmerize him for a second, and then we're going to, so I whisper in his ear sweet nothings. But I'm actually going to release him, because what I'm going to do is eat him later. I will eat him at some point, just later, when, I can get more from him, because I'm going to play the psychopath right now. Getting to know you, getting to know more about you and your blood type. So, dissociative identity disorder usually comes about as a result of trauma, right? It's a way of the blood. It's a way for the brain to sort of protect itself in a weird way, and it does that by separating the individual from the traumatic experience by removing the personality, so they don't remember it correctly. And the problem is that can then present with problems later on down the line, because then they never successfully dealt with the issue emotionally. I am by no means a therapist, but it has been explained to me that way by a professional therapist, and so that's what I'm going. DID, though, as you can imagine, gets associated with serial killers quite often. Unfortunately, this is, again, one of those misconceptions. Dissociative identity disorder, if it is claimed by serial killers, is usually faked. And there's a really famous example of this, with a man by the name of Kenneth Bianchi. All right. He was the Hillside Strangler. And he claimed that it was his alternate personality, and he was basically... So I'm going to explain, I'm going to spoil it. He was basically using dissociative identity disorder as kind of like a scapegoat to try to get an insanity plea. The way that it came about is that he was undergoing hypnotic treatment, right? And while under hypnosis, he suddenly revealed another personality called Steve Walker, and Steve Walker confessed to all the crimes. The news grabbed onto this. And all of a sudden, it was, multiple personality caused this person to go and kill, and, well, there was actually a fairly clever doctor by the name of Martin Orne, who said, maybe he's kind of fooling with us. And so what he did is he said, I want to treat Mr. Bianchi, and I will put him under hypnosis, and we will see the depths of this alternate personality. And so he gets Kenneth Bianchi into his office, and he sits him down, and before putting him under hypnosis, he casually mentions to Kenneth, it's like, I know you understand, but it's rare for one of these personalities to present and not any others. It's very rare for people with DID to have only one alternate personality. And wouldn't you know it, during that hypnosis session, a second personality popped up for the first time. So it was basically, Dr. Orne refuted that, and it was used against him, and Kenneth Bianchi was not able to claim insanity because he was not able to prove that, he was in fact suffering from DID. Now, a lot of people do suffer from DID. It is a quite real disorder. 50% of people experience symptoms of a mental disorder. 2% have chronic disorders, and 1% of that 2% suffer from DID. If you do the math, just within the U.S., there are about 65,000 people in the U.S. who suffer with dissociative identity disorder. One other kind of casual mention I should leave is, I have to analyze the blood, is psychoanalytics. And that's the stuff that Sigmund Freud used to study. And I'm going to mention this because this is kind of like, we're going back to like what criminology was and what it is today. And so I've studied that. I can make a serum, but I don't have the things for it. Sigmund Freud believed that a personality was made up of three facets: the id, the ego, and the superego. Basically what it was is the id is your lizard brain. When we see our good doctor here go into that like red bloodlust, that's the id taking over. It's the one that wants to fight, fuck, kill everything. Oh, and eat. It wants to eat constantly. And then there's the superego, and the superego is kind of like your moral compass. That's the one that has learned all of the rules and regulations of society and constantly tries to keep us on that path. And then there's the ego. The ego can be considered your conscious mind. It can be considered kind of like the one that sits in judgment between the id and superego. But really, if you really want to kind of break it down, it's sort of like, remember the old cartoons where you had the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other?
My shoulder angel.
Don't listen to that guy. He's trying to lead you down the path of righteousness. I'm gonna lead you down the path that rocks.
Oh, come off it.
It's kind of what Sigmund Freud was saying. You have the id, who is the devil, saying, yeah, we should go over there and we should stab him. And then you have like the angel on the other shoulder going, maybe that's not such a good idea. Well, psychoanalysis tried to discover that if there was trauma at an early age, it would hinder development of these three facets. And as a result, they would go out of whack. And so you'd get the devil who would say, let's go stab him. And the angel would go, yeah, that's a great idea.
Reason number 2. Look what I can do.
But what does that have to do with anything?
No. He's got a point.
That's essentially what psychoanalytics says. Psychoanalytics isn't, or at least that kind of understanding of personality is not necessarily the mainstream. Understanding it, though, is helpful, because when we do talk about personality, what's this? Dr. Swansea's message. Personality disorders do highly correlate with serial killers, and there's a whole bunch of them. Borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder, whole slew of them. But really, what you're all here for is antisocial personality disorder. And this is the personality disorder that can most commonly be labeled as psychopathy or sociopathy. Psychopaths are, in fact, real things.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman.
And while it is a term that is thrown around fairly often, to especially attached to things that we don't understand or people we don't understand, psychopaths are actually fairly common. And they share certain traits. They are intelligent, rational, calm, insincere but unreliable. They have poor judgments or impulsive, unemotional. They have poor insight, indifferent to the trust or kindness of others, impersonal in their sex life and social life, lack long-term goals, insincere. Those are the traits of like the psychopath. But psychopathy is actually kind of on a spectrum. No antiseptics at all? You can have people who have like one or two of the psychopathic traits, or you can have full-blown psychopath. And this kind of breaks down into the difference between sociopaths and psychopaths, aka the Logan Logan Paul and the Paul brothers. There's Logan Paul and what's his name? Jake Paul or something like that. I don't know. Sociopaths and psychopaths are slightly different, right? And they are sometimes labeled as different things. Sometimes a sociopath is labeled as either a developing psychopath, whereas a psychopath is labeled a true or primary psychopath. These differentiations are not inconsequential, because when you're trying to determine what a psychopath is or who is a psychopath, right, you're going to look for a certain number of traits. And the way you do that is you use what is known as Hare's psychopathy checklist. And it is a checklist of traits that can be present or non-present or very present. And based upon an assessment done by a professional who's trained in this sort of work, a determination can be made as to whether a person is a psychopath or a sociopath. And basically what they do is they go through, it's 20 traits. I'll give you a sampling of them. Glibness, superficial charm, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, cunning and manipulative behavior, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, callousness, lack of empathy, failure to accept responsibility for actions, the list goes on. Someone who's doing the analysis will look at those traits and mark them as either non-present, present, or extremely present. And based upon the score that they come up with, right? If they come up with a score of between 0 and 20, you're not a psychopath or a sociopath, right? Maybe you have some traits, maybe you have another personality disorder, but you don't have psychopathy. And then you have, between the score of 20 and 30, you are a sociopath. And then if you're between 30 and 40, you're a psychopath. So by that, a sociopath can be loosely defined as an incomplete psychopath, if you really want to differentiate them. Right? Psychopaths have all of these traits, but a sociopath usually, not always, has more empathy than a psychopath. A psychopath will lack empathy for all, but a sociopath still has empathy for certain people, usually close family members. Now, I should mention that psychopaths present differently between men and women. There's usually, when it comes to men and women, the differences usually present in demeanor or the way that things are carried out. And especially when it comes to psychopathy and sociopathy, female psychopaths present kind of differently from male psychopaths. Male psychopaths really are all about controlling others, but female psychopaths are about histrionics. And I'm going to read you a passage from my book. Female psychopaths do appear to lean toward histrionics rather than narcissism found commonly in male psychopaths. All psychopaths seek to gratify their personal needs, but female psychopaths with hysterical traits actively solicit the attention, support, and admiration of others around them. This extreme reliance on others serves a buffer from an otherwise chronic dissatisfaction, looming depression, and negative feelings towards the self. Furthermore, female psychopaths have trouble with self-perception, poor self-regard, poor interpersonal relatedness, limited understanding of the motivations of others, lack of empathy, and poor reality testing. The male psychopath, very narcissistic, very into themselves, very thinks like them God's gift to creation and all that. The one big thing about psychopaths is that they're everywhere. Usually, they make fairly successful CEOs. They make fairly successful doctors. They make fairly successful lawyers. Excuse me, not doctors, surgeons. Different from doctors. CEOs, lawyers, media personalities, salespersons, surgeons, journalists. Whereas, psychopaths don't gravitate towards, care aides, nurses, therapists, teachers, charity workers, all that. Psychopaths are all around us. There is a high correlation between psychopathy and serial killing. But just because you were a psychopath doesn't mean you are a serial killer. That's actually kind of everything that we've talked about thus far today. Everything we've talked about. High correlations doesn't mean causation, right? Just because you're a psychopath doesn't mean you're going to become a serial killer. Most of them don't. Just because you have a personality disorder doesn't mean you're going to become a serial killer or even a criminal. And the vast majority of the things that we've talked about are usually fairly treatable as well. Psychopathy is not. Just to end on this note, psychopathy. Most disorders can be treated fairly easily with therapy and drugs and whatnot. But psychopathy can't be. Because psychopaths will go into therapy and use it as a tool to further understand behavior so that they can use that behavior to control others. Which is why there is such a high correlation between psychopaths and serial killers. And that's, I think, all I want to talk about today. And with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining me here on the Big Brain Relax and Learn while we played Vampyr and learned about serial killers. Please subscribe, follow, like, hit the bell, all of those things for more of these videos. The more you do, the more these videos get promoted, and the more I can do with these videos. So please come on back, follow me at twitch.tv/fpescra, and I will see you next time.